All right. Welcome everyone. Like I said, it's really wonderful to see that you all made it, despite the crazy Norwegian weather. I think Iffit was trying to blame it on Maanta earlier today, but I don't think you took that from London. On behalf of the PRIO Center on Culture and Violent Conflict, I welcome you all to PRIO. And it's great to see you all. My name is Horst, and at this point actually I wear the hat of one of the co-directors of the center. On behalf of the center, it's a pleasure to welcome you. We're extremely proud to host the first in a seminar series of conversations with artists with the Somali British musician Maanta. I must say, when we developed the idea of having these conversations with artists, we weren't exactly imagining that we would get a world famous artist like Maanta to perform at PRIO. So thank you so much. We're really grateful for you to come today. Art, Peace and Conflict, Conversations with Artists is a seminar series that is organized by the Center because violent conflict is constructed, it's understood, it's justified, and it's organized and mediated through culture. In order to diffuse and prevent conflicts, we need to understand how is it that people give meaning to conflicts. So the seminar series aims to explore the role of art in this meaning-making process at different phases of conflict, war, and displacement. And we will have a series of conversations between artists and academics to explore these topics. And then, of course, have the pleasure to have the artists also present some of the work that they do. As you may have noticed, I'm actually mentioned in the program as the academic in the conversation with Maanta, so I can't be hosting this. I have the great pleasure to introduce Iffit Qureshi for that, and with her inspiring job and our work and the kind of amazing project she's been doing, I think she's perfect for the job. For those of you who do not know her, Iffit was born and brought up in Scotland and moved to Oslo in 1986. And since then she's been actively involved in all kinds of issues regarding to discrimination, immigration, integration, and her work includes Humans of Oslo, Oslo Folk, both through Facebook, but also the book showcases the diversity that we see in the city in kind of everyday realities. Also taking away some of the discussions about the problems of multiculturalism and showing how is this actually, who are the people of Oslo. And in 2016 she won the Oslo City Award Art Prize, and her latest exhibition, The Activists, has been viewed across Norway, and today can also still be viewed in Utøya. Definitely worthwhile going there. So I think you're now all convinced, like me, that she's the best person to moderate this. So welcome, Iffit.
So obviously there was no pressure. So. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to moderate this very important talk. Art has always been used as a form of expression and communication. People have been persecuted and even killed because of their music, photography, writing, and art. In the face of violent conflict, the arts can play powerful constructive roles, and they can help people express what they cannot in words. The art can also have powerful healing power and can be used to bring cultures and religions closer. Is it possible for the arts and academia to work together, and would they be able to collaborate in creating knowledge, awareness and understanding? When research within some disciplines is objective, rational and fact-based with little room for emotions. And would this collaboration play out when knowledge is marked by power relations? And I think I'd have to also mention my own work that I've been doing with the University of Oslo. At the moment, I'm working together with the Center for, or the Institute for Gender Research at the University of Oslo, together with somebody called Wendy Hamling. She's an anthropologist. And they're using my photography and my perception of how I see the same people and how I view them and my experiences of that interaction with them. And I must say that working with Wendy has been really exciting. But when I started working also previously with Multiling, which works with people with diverse backgrounds and especially focused on dementia, I found that there was no room for personal experiences. Theirs was very focused on objectives. Their focus was very fact-based. When I was brought in as a consultant, there was no room for creating trust between yourself and the person that they were going to interview, which was extremely sad. And as a result, they weren't successful in reaching out to the group of people that they were hoping to reach out to. So compassion and trust is extremely important for my own personal experiences. The situation in the world today demands that the disciplinaries adapt to the new challenges being faced in the 21st century. Cynthia Cohn, Director of Peace Building and the Arts at Brandeis University, has summed this up perfectly when she says, the biggest challenge of the 21st century is war, inequality, climate change and migration. These problems require solutions that can't be found through linear processes alone. Solutions will arise through creative, transdisciplinary approaches, and arts and culture will likely play leading roles. We hope to discuss how this is possible and how producing counter-narratives about war and refuge and working across the arts and academia can lead to a better understanding and knowing. So without further ado, we will kickstart the first discussion in the series, but first I'd like to introduce our Maanta. It is an honour to introduce the singer and musician Maanta to participate in today's event. He is the voice of the new Somali generation and is today regarded as one of the most creative and talented Somali musicians. How does that sound? Both in the Horn of Africa and the diaspora. Paris-based Star Africa recognised Maanta's achievements when it named him a Somali culture shaper in London. His music touches upon issues which affect not only Somalians but also visible minorities who feel rejected by wider society, and his song Dipa from 2010 confronts racism and hypocrisy head-on. Maanta was a goodwill ambassador for the UNHCR and has visited many refugee camps. His song Bari, Dangerous Crossing, inspired the UNHCR to create awareness around the dangers of crossing the Gulf of Aden and Red Sea from Africa to war-stricken Yemen. So, with that, I'd like you to take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Iffit. Thank you, Cindy. It's really a pleasure to be in Oslo again. It's my 4th time here, and it's the first time I've seen this much snow anywhere. And I can assure you, if this event was actually happening in London, they would have cancelled it a long time ago. But and to have as many people come to this event, it's really a pleasure, and it's an honor. So what I wanted to do before we actually start our dialogue or conversation was to introduce you not just my work, but about Somali music and what Somalis were known for before all these labels, like, you hear all the mess, like, media and so on. So first of all, what I wanted to do is to play a little video for you about the work that I did with the UNHCR and the work that I did while visiting the refugee camps. Then we can take it from there.
Now, music and theatre is a way of life for Somalis, and British Somali singer, songwriter Maanta has chosen this medium to raise awareness about the dangers of coming to Europe as an illegal migrant. He recently visited a refugee camp, and I asked him what he saw.
I met a lot of young people, as well as the older generations or their parents, who are quite a lot worried about the fact that quite a lot of them, their friends or family members, try to cross borders and seas in order to get to Europe, and surprisingly even Yemen as well.
And you yourself have a family member who's made this dangerous crossing and has arrived in Italy. Tell us a little bit about his journey.
First cousin was detained in Libya after he tried to cross to Italy. Eventually he made it, but the suffering was quite a lot because he was detained. He was in Libya for about 2 years, and he's the reason why I made this song. which became synonymous with this issue and became a theme of anti-human trafficking for Somalis, and then eventually the UNHCR picked it up, and that's how I got involved in the campaign.
And of course, it's not just going there to tell them about how dangerous this crossing is. You've also been out there making music with some of these refugees. Tell us about it.
Surprisingly, these camps that I went to, there were some of the founding members of some of the best Somali music bands from the 1980s and 90s. People whose music that I looked up to, and they were like my musical heroes. And it was really shocking for me to see in these situations. And the best thing that I could do was to go back and to work with them. It was just really a way of me also showing that you can't come from outside, but also there are artists in these camps that have, in my opinion, really a better message to tell. It was really rewarding to work with them.
If you had a younger brother who was back home and said he wanted to make this dangerous crossing to Europe, what would be your advice to him?
I would say before you get to even Libya, you would have to go through Sudan, and there are serious issues there. And then from Sudan to Egypt and the deserts there. And people in these countries also, they see you as a money-making scheme. So I would say think twice about it.
Maanta there.
Yeah, so the song that you saw there is called Tahrib. Yeah, Tahrib means trying to leave a place that's not safe and trying to go to another place for better opportunities. This particular problem or situation has actually affected Somalis extremely. Not just Somalis, but in 2016, it also affected me and my family, as I was saying in that film. My first cousin was detained in Libya, and he was there for 8 months. And that particular situation affected my family quite deeply, because I used to watch these human traffickers calling my mother, asking for money, calling sometimes, my cousin. And so traditionally, Somalis, when they used to make songs, they would write about things that personally affect them. And I've been now in the music industry for like 9 years, and that's, for me, the best song that I've ever done. It's not because that song made me more money or it took me to places that I wouldn't go, but because of the feedback that I get to this day from young people who tell me that thanks to the message in that song, I'm thinking twice about, going to those places. Now, moving back a little bit historically about Somalis, before all these piracy and terrorism and wars and so on, Somalis were known as the nation of poets. And I'm not just saying that, no, it's another Somali saying that. You can take the word of a British explorer who went to visit the Somali territories in the early 1800s, just before colonization, ironically, and he reported that almost every 3 people that he met, one person was actually a poet. Now, poetry in Somali culture, it's still very significant to this day. If you go to weddings, if you go to conferences, even in meetings, there has to be some kind of a poetry dialogue, or some kind of someone has to recite a poem at the end of the event or somehow. So weddings is the best place to actually see a Somali poetry at best, because what tends to happen is there's a rivalry between the bride side of the family and the groom side of the family. There's always like a competition. The bride side might come up with a poem that says, "Oh, your son is not good enough for us," and then the groom side will say, "Oh, my son is a scientist now, so for your daughter." So I'm telling you this message because when the prior got in touch with me and they told me, "Oh, Can you actually take part in a discussion or a talk about violence and peace? I was like, no, I don't want to talk about violence again. Here is another, invitation that people that want to invite me to talk about violence and associated with Somalis. And then when I looked at the organization, eventually I realized that PRI actually stands for Peace Research Institute Organization. So I agreed to it. But I'm telling you this because as a Somali, is also my role to whatever platform that I get to actually in this dialogue about violence and peace and war, which is not just about the physical side of things, but it's also about the dialogue. It's also about the news or about the media. So now, are there any writers in this audience? Any people that do poetry? Any songwriters? Okay, right. 2 people, 3 people. I'm going to ask you a serious question. Hopefully you'll have the answer. I'm here to help also. Do you know what allegory is? Allegory? Do you want to tell us what allegory is?
You say something to represent something else.
Okay. There's another word, alliteration. Anyone know alliteration?
Alliteration.
Do you know? Yeah, what is it?
With the same letter.
Okay.
Starting.
Okay, fantastic. Now, if there's one thing you can learn from my talk today is that Somali poetry is very significant in Somali songwriting. And almost every Somali song in the world has to follow a very strict rule of writing. There are 2 forms. One is telling stories or sometimes hiding messages. So you could be listening to a love song, but in most cases it's a political song. Okay? That's the allegory side of things. The most distinct part about Somali songs, which is completely, I think, unique in Somali poetry and mostly song, is the fact that if you start a song with a letter, then every line of that song has to continue with that letter. Not only does it have to continue with that same letter, but it also has to rhyme. So as you can see how tricky it is to write Somali songs. I can give you an example here. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah. Keep going. Okay. So this is one of my songs, and when we were writing this song, in most cases I come up with the idea about the song, but I get helped writing these songs because I've lived most of my life in the UK. If I had made a mistake, then Somalis would not be very merciful on me. So this particular song, for example, goes like, Safi safi weye, qalbigeedu safi weye, anna saaxiidayda waan helayo safi weye, haddaan sawirkeeda suuradeeda ku tilmaamo, socod laafisi masaa'id, quruxdeeda, surka luqunteeda sida eebba u sameey. As you can hear, there's an S. There's an S. Now, if someone else was singing another song, and they started that song with H, it has to. So if someone who doesn't actually understand Somali music was listening to a Somali song, they think, what a strange language. The language is it's not strange, it's just the way you write songs like that. So even though I'm a Somali singer, but I still follow that tradition of writing Somali songs and presenting it in terms of lyrically. But musically, I take inspirations from all different kind of music. Now, one of the most important songs that I was telling you was that Tarib song, but also I did another song which was it's called Deqa. And Deqa, most people used to think, Deqa is a Somali name for females. It's one of the most popular Somali female names. But it was also called, Somali Airlines was called Deqa, which meant sufficient or suffice. And I don't think we have it here now, but if you ever get a chance, I can maybe write it down for you later on. That was also another very important song that I ever did because it was talking about how people are profiled because of their faith. And there's a video in there where I get interrogated by 2 British immigration or Secret Service people, and they interrogate me. And it used to happen very common, like consistently, you know. So I just, every time it happened, I just used to write down how it happened, and we made a video about that. So that's who I am, and thank you for having me again, and hope you enjoy the dialogue the rest of the time. Thank you.
Introduced Wendy.
Cindy.
Cindy, sorry, goodness.
We knew this was going to happen. She's called me Nancy.
I've called Nancy, Cindy, whatever. Yeah,
something with I.
Yeah, the Y at the end.
Y.
Yeah. So, was it Nancy? No, Cindy. Cindy Horst is a research director and research professor in migration and refugee studies at the Paece Research Institute of Oslo, which is here. And it's because of her we're all sitting here today. Her research focuses on the migration process. Somebody collapsed when I introduced her. Okay. Yeah. Including diaspora engagement with regions of origin and the transnational activities of refugees. She also researches how individuals can challenge the status quo and affect societal change in post-conflict settings. So Cindy, thank you for setting up this meeting, or this gathering today. But I'd like to first start with you. I'm not going to call you Cindy, but
on the weekends, you can call me.
Yeah.
Joking, that
Yeah. Is that you mentioned Dika, right? I say it in Arabic. Dika, how do you say it? Dika. Okay. So and it was from 2010, and I was wondering that you were talking about racial profiling. So a lot of your, from what I've seen at least, that a lot of your work is inspired from your own experiences, and you take up some very powerful subjects, but your music is so mellow. I mean, most people be screaming it into a microphone. Could you explain that? Like,
I think maybe it's just because it's nature. I mean, still my band members who tend to smoke quite a lot of weed. I don't, by the way. They joke that if I ever smoked, I would never get up. So you know, so I mean, I think it's important that your personality shines through your creativity. So if I was trying and do something that I'm not, then I don't think I would have any.
Yeah. So I mean. So basically, a lot of your work contains emotions, right? So you can't separate that from the work that you do.
No. I mean, I think it's quite different. Maybe I'm wrong, but research and art, this is the discussion that we're having, might be different because most of art person is white, and it's white. So artists tend to talk mostly about their own personal experiences, whereas I kind of maybe find research people tend to do, and maybe you can correct me on this one now, but they tend to go and do, like maybe ask questions and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you're an anthropologist, right? Which is, within the humanities at least, there's more room for maybe personal experiences and emotions.
Yeah, of course, in a way, you're right that in research, that's often the case, but there are different ways of understanding academic knowledge creation, of course, and some of that focuses a lot on removing the researcher from what they're studying, because you want to be objective, you want to really get to the truth, and for that to do, you want to make sure that you influence as little as possible of the phenomenon you're studying. But in anthropology, in feminist studies, in critical studies, post-colonial studies, in many fields, and in humanities in general, it's much more common to say, well, the way that we understand the world influences how the questions we ask, how we see things, and we need to be able to understand that positionality. We need to understand, okay, I'm coming from a particular point. And on top of that, also, if you really want to understand other people's experiences, which is what we do as anthropologists, it really requires a lot of trust, and it really requires you really to actually step in. And like, I can't just go to you and say, okay, tell me about your life, and I'm this blank. You can't really see anything of who I am. Why would you share anything, and why would you tell me the truth? You know?
Yeah, because that's what I also noticed when I was working with the University of Oslo at the centre in Multiling. There was no room for personal experiences. There was no room for trying to reach out and build trust. They had a time frame, and they had to finish everybody within that time, and they had a specific number of people that they had to reach out to. So in many ways, it was just the numbers that they were more concerned about, even though they were talking about people and dementia. So it's quite interesting. And I was wondering, is that how important are your own personal experiences? I mean, you went to, when you were 25 years old, you went to a refugee camp and you were working with Somalians. I mean, how much did your personal experiences come in your, master?
Can I just say, for those of you responsible for the sound, we are kind of hearing ourselves
An echo.
So if that's possible to fix, maybe by us sitting somewhere else. So, yes, yeah, exactly. No, I think it was really great also to see the video, and for you to go to the camps and to see. Like, for me, of course, when I was 21, came from a very different background. I went to the DAO. I saw a lot of this, and for me, what was most life-changing was seeing people manage in these incredibly horrendous conditions. So it wasn't, of course, seeing that people live in camps. It's a semi-desert area. There's no water. There's no food. That has a deep impact. But the biggest impact was to see the extremely traumatic experience that people have had in Somalia, and at the same time also the conditions in the camps. And still, it was all about supporting each other, making life possible in the camps, and that made a deep impression. And that's like when I was 21, so it really shaped a lot of what I did afterwards as well. It comes with a deep responsibility as well, which I guess you might also feel. And for you, it's more like this is your personal experience as well. But in a way, it is personal to me as well.
Because I'm wondering, is that when you've gone in to play music, for example, in the refugee camps, you also work with music as well. Do you see music as also something as a healing as well, that it helps people to express their frustrations, or is it a release?
I can only, it might be different. I don't know how different it would be in the DAP. The camps or the displacement units that I went to were in the Somali region, like under the Ethiopian administration. So they seemed, when we went there, each camp, we went to 3 camps, and I went twice, and each time I stayed 3 weeks. So those camps had theater groups. Each camp had a band. They had like well-known artists, some of them from back, this is what I was talking about in that video, from the 1980s. Somalia, unfortunately, they're still there, but they still had their role to play in the communities. So yes, war has affected them, but it really just shows, I'm just talking from the Somali experience perspective, that art is still important to the Somali community, despite what the media and what other people might think. So it also kind of like disappointed me with the UN, because they could have used those artists, but they didn't. So like they're flying me from London, like that money could have actually gone, like to those artists. And eventually when I tried to speak to them about that, it just seemed a little bit odd to me. But yeah, so despite whatever, people still, and also another thing is, I was a refugee myself, so I was in these camps, so I've seen, I can remember what it was like. It's not necessarily, I wasn't there as long, unlucky for some of them, as long as they were there. I was fortunate enough to get up, but I was there, so I wasn't surprised that I would find, these things. I was actually surprised that these international organizations are not doing effectively, like,
how you expect them to.
Yeah.
Because I guess, like you said, you've also been in that position yourself as well, because you moved to London when you were 8 years old, is that correct? So I'm guessing that the situation that you saw then maybe was like flashbacks to your own
I mean, but the thing is, to be honest with you, when you're young and you're in a camp, it's more difficult for the elders, because they're worried about their children, they're worried about responsibilities. But when you're young, I mean, from what I can remember, I remember being in a queue for food and stuff, and we used to be fun for us. We used to laugh, me and my brothers and me and my cousins and stuff, like just, we were just having jokes and stuff in the queue for food and stuff. I can't remember it. I cannot remember it to be. I mean, some of the distressing situations was seeing my family members being in distress as a youngster, but I think it's more traumatic for the elder and also for the youth, because there are ages when you reach that you actually, if you're in a camp and you're in your 20s and you were there and you were born there, and in Ethiopia, they were fortunate enough to have the schools, but as soon as you finish school, there's nothing. There's no universities. Like you can't go. You can't even leave some of these camps. And in the case of the Somalis there, I don't consider the Somalis in that region as refugees, because that region is the Somali itself. So there's a lot of.
When it comes to building trust, and having empathy, did you find that it was easy for you to reach out to people?
They knew me. I mean, they can relate to me because they knew me as one of their own. I mean, they actually get quite a lot of other. Recently, they had something called Clowns Without Borders.
Yes.
Do you know what they are? It's a good concept. Clowns Without Borders are like clowns that literally they go to these camps and they entertain children. So I mean, children can relate to that because you don't need to be talking to them so. But but for me, it was more personal, really. Than anything else.
So I just also follow up from that, because I guess it has a lot to do with how we understand knowledge. Like, how do we all know? In academia, it's very often this idea that knowledge is just about the rational. It's just about, so you can get the particular information based on what's here. But we all know that our knowledge doesn't just come from here. It comes from bodily experiences. It comes from, so, for example, hunger can be understood through the medical side of things and the biology and everything else, but it can't really be understood without actually having experienced hunger. So these different types of understandings and knowledge is really important to bring in. And I think in academia we really put the rational knowledge on a pedestal and say, well, that's objective truth. I think that's deeply problematic, because how do we know? How do you understand life? It's not just in here, it's experienced, it's lived, it's embodied.
I mean, I was just thinking about when you were talking about when the UN wanted to use you instead of somebody who's already within the camps, right? So they want somebody who's a face who's already known to try and promote their work, okay? Whereas when you write an academic paper, it's most likely to be read by other academics or by your own colleagues. So you don't have the same kind of outreach as maybe an artist would. How are you trying to combat that?
I mean, first of all, this issue I also find recognizable, because I have the same thing. If I go, say I'm doing research in Hargeisa or Galloway, like, why is it me creating that knowledge and not the individuals that are there? So a lot of these questions are quite similar. And then it also has to do with who is supported, who's seen as expert, who's seen as educated enough, and all those kind of questions come in for me as well. Now I forgot your particular question. But,
yeah, it was how you're also trying to reach out to.
Yeah, so that's one. I remember we were in Hargeisa at the Cultural Center. I'm working together with an organization, Positive Negatives, where they do comics and animations and podcasts and all kinds of stuff. Together with the director, Ben Dix, and he was telling the audience, Cindy's articles, they're read by tens and tens of people. Isn't that great? and they've had BBC, and they've had The Guardian, etc. And they have these comics and animations that really relate to lots of people, and millions of hits. Millions of people actually see this. Ben is a very good friend, so we're still friends also after that. I know this, and I also know that if I really want to, so a lot of the things that you're talking about earlier, I have very similar motivations that I see that the news out there just so misrepresents refugees, the Somali community, etc. And I want to do something about that with this sense of responsibility of this 21-year-old. I can't do that by writing academic articles. I can do it with the research and everything I'm building up, but then there needs to be something else. Because I can't convince all of you to also read my articles. It's just not going to happen. Some of you might be academics, but the majority of you, it's a different language, it has a different purpose. So if I really want to do something there, I need to collaborate with people who have a much wider.
Do you have a collaboration going with some graphic artists?
Yeah, so it is like the positive negatives. Some of you might remember the Somalis in European cities. So they made comics on different conditions of Somalis in Oslo, in Amsterdam, and different places, where one of the pieces was on the random arrests of young Somalis in London, I think. Another one was about how people are affected by the media coverage, being seen and portrayed as terrorists. What does that do with people? So there are lots of different themes that were discussed. And now we're working, I think Ebba is also in the room, but we're working on a project looking at how is it that individuals feel inspired to try to change society when there's actually a war going on or after a war. So it's a very risky environment, and of course Trude also in Myanmar is looking at similar things. How is it that people dare to stand up, to dare to act and to do something? And there we have a case of the UFO group from the 80s who stood up against the dictatorship. It's a very unknown story that Ebba has really covered very well, and now we're working with making comics and animations and also using poetry to try to spread this story to especially the younger generation in Oslo, in the UK, other places, but especially also in Somaliland. Because a lot of it is about what histories are being told, what is being remembered. And of course, as academics and outsiders, it's really difficult. Like, you have to be very, very careful how you kind of start messing around with national histories. And so it's in very close collaboration with many people who are very knowledgeable about this. But I really feel that these are things that are meaningful and that make it worthwhile doing the kind of work that we're doing.
Yeah, because that was actually my other question. I think you've already answered that, and that was about how restricted are you, as an academic?
Well, for you, as long as you have money, you're no, but I'm joking a little bit, but it is. We are dependent on Research Council funding or research funding, and you need to find a good balance between being taken serious as academics, but also being innovative, and then really, like, as long as we do interesting work and we have the funding for it. So it gives a lot of freedom, especially in a place like Norway. I think we're extremely privileged with the abilities we get and the funding that we can get. It's very competitive, but there are opportunities to do that, and it's important to do it in a way that I think makes sense.
I was just wondering whether this more focus on emotions and making academia a little bit more personal is driven by gender studies or feminists.
Yes, I mean some of that is definitely originally. Yeah.
So where does that leave the elite white male?
You've been following the news in Norway, maybe, have you? No, I don't know. So for those of you who don't know, there's been, in June we had a decolonizing event, and that's created a lot of discussion in the media in Norway. And a lot of polarized positions about who has the right to say particular things, etc. And that's been quite gendered. It's also, kind of very, it's a very white discussion as well, which I think is deeply problematic. So I haven't really engaged so much in the discussion that followed because I found it totally useless. Yeah. If you really want to engage in trying to address some of those things, you work together with the people who are keen on doing that, rather than trying to speak to each other in Aftenposten or something like that.
Yeah, because isn't that not like if I just look at the work that I've been doing, both through Humans Evolved or the exhibitions I've had, I've been very, I think, underlying everything I've done has been focused on trying to change the narrative. Is that what you've also been trying to do with the work that you've been doing?
I think the mass or the mainstream media had they were lucky before, to be able to create narratives. But now, thanks to the social media, they have a fight in their hands, I mean, yes, the social media has their own disadvantages, but the fact that nowadays you don't have to go to a mainstream media to get your source of media. You could easily just, maybe someone can tweet about exactly what's going on in the country, whereas someone else before mainstream media channel or whatever would feed you their own narrative of. So I think, yes, fighting and trying to change the narrative, I think it's become a little bit more, doable, I think, because nowadays you can question sources, you can question like any news that comes out, even though some people just like to jump and say fake news, Nowadays, everything's a fake news, but even though they're the ones who are telling the fake news. But basically, the world has changed, and social media has democratized the world and telling stories. So I think if you're an artist now, even if you're an activist, you have platforms where you can use, if you use it the right way, where you can actually question and dispel some narratives.
But you're still being affected. I mean, the song that we mentioned, The Car, which is about being, stop and search or racial profiling.
I mean, that was 2010.
Yeah.
But things have changed.
But you got stopped in the US. You weren't allowed.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't actually stopped. I was. They made my visa like so hard for me to get. Even though, like, I think it was last year. Every time I tend to go to the US quite a bit because there's a big Somali community in Minnesota, and that's where I do most of my shows. And what tends to happen is, as an artist, when you go to the US, you get the okay, you get the go-ahead from the US, then you would end up going to the US embassy in the UK. So then I would go to the embassy with my band members. I mean, I'm the band leader, these are my band members, and I'm the only Somali in my band. So then they would get, all of them would get okay visa,
Not you.
and then not me. I'm like, well, they're not going to be able to sing Somali. So then, and it's very, very consistent. Like when I say consistent, it's always about the same thing. They would never tell you, oh, because you're Somali, or because you're Muslim, But they would say, oh, we have to do background checks. You've done every background check you can. It's been okay. But it's ways of like inconvenience you and I think they're always using names that flash up, as an excuse. But recently it was more because they've selected 7 countries. So, like Somalis, where unfortunately it doesn't matter what passport you have. It doesn't matter even if you were born in the UK, as long as you have that ethnicity in the forms that you fill out at the embassy that says Somali somewhere, they'll be like, like one of them. So, and it's, yes, but the thing is, everyone is aware of that. Like that problem exists. It's not like people are not aware of it. It was just part of systematic, like policies that unfortunately is still going on. I mean, I don't want to sound controversial or anything, but some other faiths, if someone did that to some other faiths, there would be uproar. A case in example is like if someone did that to a person that was Jewish, it would become anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is illegal. Something you can go to jail. But it just seems like Muslims can easily be picked on. And when people do that, it tends to be, it's part of democracy. You're against, you're against, like freedom of speech if you want to.
But can I just go back, because all of this is also to do with the different. I really like the way that you started your presentation to say, well, there used to be a different story, and it used to be Somalia as the nation of poets and poetry. And I think that that's really interesting also in terms of the role that even the government played in supporting some of these. You were talking about the different theaters and artists that actually were supported and got to do a lot of interesting things because that was kind of part of the culture. I wonder whether you could say a little bit more about that.
It was more really to do with socialism than a Somali culture per se. I think like there was a Somali kind of there was a government, Somalia was a socialist government from the I think it was early 60s until the late 80s or early 90s. And what used to happen in Somalia was every ministry used to have a theater group, and they used to have a band. And the biggest, just to give you the scale of how influential these bands were, the biggest band, the Somali national band, was called Waberi, and they were called the Dawn, like the New Dawn, when they were first formed. They had at least 3,000 employees. So these were like singers, composers, technicians. I am at this particular moment working with a professor who's based in Minneapolis. His name is Professor Saeed Salah. He teaches linguistics, but he used to specialize children languages as well. And he used to have he was part of the Ministry of Education, and he used to have a band called Iffit. Now, Iffit in Somali translates as the light, and in Somali culture, the light is associated with knowledge. So Iffit were part of the Ministry of Education. Now, every band had a specific role. Those days, I think like in the late 70s to the early 1980s, every band, in the case of the Ministry of Education, their role was obviously to educate. Now, what if I was to tell you that within a year or 2 years, thanks to these organizations and this art, Somalia has received the highest literacy within a year.
That's great.
Now, what happened was in Africa, in Africa.
And in
Yeah.
the increase of literacy.
Yeah, increase, yeah. So in Africa, basically. But, I mean, maybe even in the world, within that time, because within a year, they've actually achieved that. So what used to happen was, Iffit band, as well as like students would be sent outside to like, I think there's someone who was part of one of those students in the band. We had a discussion last night, So he was part of those students. So they would send to the villages, and they would stay with these families, and they would teach them how to write and read the language. So then within 6 months or however long they were sent, they would come back and they would report back. So within a year, they've achieved that. So, but it was part of a socialism drive. It was part of a government, but it was, I think it's a different way of I think we were just talking about art funding and all these kind of different kind of discussions. It can be part of, I think that discussion.
I mean, I just found it really inspiring because I thought, okay, imagine this happening in Norway, where really the arts are used as a way, like for example, in the Ministry of Education. The idea of thinking.
The biggest thing was, I don't know if you want to wish that. They have no choice. They have to go. If you didn't go, you're going to jail. Yeah. So you're going to
this in perspective now.
you live in Oslo, and you're going to go to somewhere like all the way in the northern mountains, and so you have no choice to go. You have to go. So I think that was they have no choice, so they had to do it.
You're not getting promoted.
That's successful.
Yeah.
I was thinking was, Cindy, is that, I just got so into this conversation right now, is that I want to talk about social media as well, is how important is social media for you in the work that you do, and is it something that you use actively?
I think I'm totally the wrong person to ask. I mean, Lul can also say, there's several people in the room who are extremely good on social media. I don't really relate to it so much, but what I try to do is to work with people, like for example with positive negatives, work with people who create these kind of everything that we're learning through research, create that into a story that can easily be understood, and then work with social media from there. And of course, we have communications. Priya also helping us with that, but personally, I'm just really, I'm not really. And I think partly also because what you're referring to, it has its challenges as well. I want to be able to reflect and to build, like, everything becomes faster and faster, and I think for academics that's really damaging. If you really want to understand a particular issue, you need to have time, and you need to also take time to reflect on what your messages are, etc. I think in that sense researchers are much slower, because we need to make sure that we can actually say what we're saying. And with social media it's so much more faster, and it becomes something completely different from what you're actually thinking.
But then by the time you've said what you want to say, people have...
Yeah, I know. I mean, you don't have to tell me that, but yeah, definitely. That's why it's important to work with art.
I was just thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a double sword, social media. And as an artist, I find that it can be detrimental to art, because people are in competition nowadays to share everything. And sometimes you have a good idea and you ended up sharing it online, and then before you know, other people can claim it, you know? So, and then also, I think also, like, when it comes to reporting stories as well, people just share things without fact checking or trying to find out if this story is, like, so many stories have gone viral and have actually become international news, and then later on people found out that wasn't what happened. So, and I did actually have also some personal issues with social media, and I just think, just in my opinion, the more, if you keep it professional and you just share what you're ready to share, and sometimes, you know, you can share your opinion, but if you're not quite extreme with your opinions, I think it can be a good platform.
Yeah, absolutely, I totally agree. Because I found that for the work that I was doing, if I wasn't good at using social media, I wasn't going to be able to reach out to people. Basically, it was important for me to understand how that worked. But it is, like you said, it is exhausting, it is time consuming, and it takes away all your focus away from what you basically want to work on. I was thinking, how much time do we have? Because I think people are
maybe also eager to ask some questions.
Yeah,
possibly. Really?
So we have the gentleman here in the front.
Yeah.
And we can just ask people to keep their comments or questions short. That would be great, so then we can get enough questions in.
And please introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. My name is Kaman. I also came to this country when I was 8 years old, from Somalia. I work as a teacher now, working as a teacher for 10 years. I have actually two questions. One is for you, Maanta. The first one. I've actually been introduced to you through this conference. So I listened to some of your music, and it was really very nice, entertaining, and also a lot of good messages. And I was wondering, obviously, when your music is describing important topics, do you also try to project how it should be, or how things should change? I haven't really studied your music so much, so I'm just asking you that. And to follow up on that, maybe you both could answer that question: in philosophy, art is one of the 5 parts of philosophy, they say. So which is like the chicken and the egg? Which comes first? Is the art that has to change the philosophy, or the philosophy has to change the art? I think this philosophy you have to have the right mindset, and you'll get good music, good art. And do you, as an extension to that, do you feel like you're alone in the Somali music? Do you feel like there are other people like you who are taking up these important topics today, or do you feel alone? Thank you.
I wish there were more people. I mean, I still find challenging. There are so many topics that I would really want to cover. I'm limited because of my Somali language writing skills and poetry writing skills, and I've had problems where I would go to like songwriters who are amazing with like ideas, and they would say to me, "Forget about this. I have a love song for you, man. You know, here's one I wrote about my wife last year. You know, do this, man. It's gonna become a hit. You know, I know it's gonna become a hit because everyone, you know, love is universal. Everybody wants to hear about love. You know, but I really wanna talk about discrimination within the Somali community. You know, there's discrimination on every level. You know, there are topics within the Somali community like clan and like, you know, even like I wouldn't say class, but there are racism within or discrimination within the Somali community that needs to be really covered, and I really want to do that. But I've had so much challenge in writing the right songs for those, and it's important to cover those topics because I've only ever done about 3 or 4 songs about topics that people can relate to, and those songs people related to it so much more than the love songs. You know, yes, the love songs will get you a million hits, you know, but I'd rather have like 100,000, you know, hits and people who are like, you know, or like 100 emails that would say, you know what, when I was traveling the other day, when I was going through that airport, they did this to me and they did this to me, and my mother, because of that, you know, can't travel anymore. You know, you could, that's a lot more really important, and I hope to really go to that side of things. Then I want to limit all my love songs. Yeah, so do more of that really. Then.
Could I just relate to the question that you're asking about, like what you want? So basically, a vision. I think what's really important is that if there are these narratives out there, these stories out there, very often what we do is we aggressively go in and say, no, this is not. I think it's very important to step away from that, and like you say, instead just think about, so what is it that I want to create? What is it that so the counter stories then don't necessarily relate to the stories out there, but also, and of course that's important as well, but also are stories that are more about vision and hope, etc. Because I think that's a way of not always reacting to, but rather coming from your own. Okay, this is the society I want to see. This is kind of what justice means to me. This is what peace means to me, etc. I think that's really important for us to do because it's so easy, because there's so much negativity out there, that it's all about reactive. And I think if we really want to make some changes, then it's also important to think about, okay, so what visions do we have?
Kama?
My name is also Common, probably different spelling. So I'm a journalist, I'm a documentary photographer. I'm working on a startup called Iffit, which works into media. So you mentioned all the points that also irritates me. But I also want to comment that I do slow journalism, quite slow. So I investigate things, especially immigrants here, the challenges and what they're going through. And my background as a British-born Hong Konger, I have that two perspectives, but also if you understand in Hong Kong, there's a political situation between Hong Kongers and mainland Chinese. So when you talked about in Somalia, you have that, internal conflict, there's also this similarity thing. So my question is that, what do you think needs to be done then in media? I mean, I'm trying to come in, trying to create a platform where there's diverse voices, where we're trying to investigate deeper in many ways as a journalist, but also in a research kind of type approach where we really are trying to look at a lot of data. For example, I collected over 200 respondents about their financial inclusion, like the challenges in opening up a bank account simply in Oslo. And there's so many challenges, it's qualitative. But what more can I do? What more can the media do here? We talked about funding, right? You got Iffit. Now, I don't know how when you read the criteria, it talks about it has to be your publication has to go towards the allmennhetsgruppe, which is the the majority general public. And I asked him what that meant, and he talked about the Norwegians. Now, as a minority here, first generation, it felt like a battle all the time, and I'm trying to create space for diverse voices. So I wanted to hear, any comments and tips and possible collaboration. So.
Yes.
I mean, first of all, I want to say, are you sure you're not included in the Norwegians? And I don't know enough about your background, but I feel that also it's really important to claim Norwegianness, even though it's not necessarily given based on. So there's a particular idea of what Norwegianness means, but in practice it means a lot. It means something completely different. And I think some of those discussions are more patent in places like Norway than in the US and the UK, where the discussions are different. Racism can be discussed, which is impossible here. So I think one thing is to also claim that when there is a requirement for kind of relating to Norwegians, then claiming that space is important. I know that's very easy to say when actually you're not given that space, but it needs to also start from really claiming that and to challenge and not to repeat the same language. And how to do that, I think, is a bit difficult. But who's included and who's excluded when we talk about Norwegians, for example? We need to make sure that understanding broadens. And then, of course, it should be important to find ways of collaborating and also to challenge, as researchers as well, we're increasingly asked to, it's faster and faster, it's more and more production, and finding ways of stepping back and saying, well, this is not what we can be doing in a good way, and trying to collaborate. But maybe, I don't know if anyone knows any rich people who are kind of willing to. I think it is important to see, are there different ways of funding this? Are there alternative ways of working towards the more slower, more in-depth type of studies, both for journalists and for academics?
And I think that's one of the challenges as well for journalists, is that they're a dying breed, and it's not a surprise that so many journalists have left their jobs and moved on to other things, because having a blog on, sorry, not about you, but having a blog on YouTube or an Instagram account will make more money for you than your journalist job, yeah. And how many people actually do in-depth reporting? I mean, slow journalism, there's a handful of doing that in the world. So I think that it is important to kind of like brand it as your own, brand it as something that's exclusive, if it is exclusive. And when it comes to applications, I've written lots of applications as well, you can talk to me afterwards, but when it comes to the application side as well, is you're basically selling yourself, that's what you're doing, And I think that in many ways, even when it comes to, for example, an institution like Fritur as well, they are very much focused on what's popular out there, They're not so much focused on, God help them, they'll never give me funding again. But the thing is that they're not very much, they're more focused on what's popular. And that's very sad, because if you are, you get lots of likes on Facebook, you get lots of attention on social media, automatically they want to bring you on board. Whereas somebody else who maybe isn't as well known won't get that kind of attention, and they might just be much better, But I think there's a different discussion, but it's interesting, definitely. We have the lady with the red pen, and then we will go over there. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of people want to ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be quick, try to be quick. There are many values and interests involved in development project, artistic project for development and for peace building. And I forgot to present myself. My name is Solveig, and I used to work for Rikskonsertene with music and development for 10 years. And now I'm a researcher at the University of Agder doing a PhD on the same topic. So there are, obviously, you mentioned the example of one like NGO or UN or something flying you down to the refugee camp and say that, okay, why did they spend all this money on me instead of supporting the local artists? And then, obviously, for them it's a lot of like image building and fame and all these things involved. But for you and for the artists, there are also inspirational and civic issues, right? Yeah. So my question is whether you see this as, you know, fundamentally opposed models, like it's either bringing you down or supporting them, or can these things be combined in the sense that you come down, you give workshops with them, you inspire them, you give them networks, you include them in your art world?
Yeah.
And how can this, you know, how do you have any good experiences of these kind of situations where you manage to kind of get them together in a way?
Collaboration, I would say. And
serving many purposes all together in a successful manner.
Yeah, I mean those songwriters in those camps, I'm still in touch with them. We write to each other. They send me songs, you know, like so many songs. So I'm just waiting for the chance to actually. But I would have really liked. It's not also about having the funding. It's about the security as well. You will not get clearance. There just seems to be so much bureaucracy involved, and you know, when you're in the creative world, like if you're always like you're trying to create things and you put so many obstacles in front of you, it can become frustrating, you know. So but I would say the best way you can work with them is collaboration, and you know, as long as you can communicate with them, and you know, I'm in touch with those. I'm going back next week. And even though I don't work with the UN anymore, I'm going there personally. And now the situation in that region has changed politically, which means there's a little bit more freedom, and I can literally just go there by myself and just work with them if I need to work with them. I've also the camp leaders, or the guys who were in charge of those, I'm good friends with them. We're in touch, so they're happy to have me back there. Not officially, but just as informally. So I think if you have that personal touch, and people can relate to you artistically or personally, then you can work with them. It's about collaboration, I would say.
Everybody who wants to ask a question, can they put hands up? Okay, so there's a lady in the fourth row who's had her hand up several times. That's great. And then we'll take this row, but if we will take 3 questions from here, and then we'll go on to the next row, okay?
Got it.
So, there you go.
Hi. Thank you. My name is Ingrid Eide. I'm old, as you can see, but a co-founder of this institute, and I've taken quite a lot of interest in African states, and we have seen in many of the states in Africa how the colonial heritage has created states that are not hanging together. Artificial. Yes. But then you had Somalia, which was much less fragmented, which was blessed with having one language spoken by the entire population, if I'm right. And still, you didn't manage either. So why is it that with the structure and the cultural heritage you have, that you've not been able to bring it up to a state level in the modern sense? I have, if I allow, one more question. We had a very good colleague, Hassan Kainan, from Somalia in UNESCO. And several times he was in my home, and he looked at all the photos and drawings and paintings of our family, and some 6 generations. And he said, oh, I don't have an image of any, but I know 12 generations. And is that still the case? And if that is no longer the case, is that a danger to the future cohesion of Somalia? Difficult.
No, I know the question.
So what we'll do is go to the next.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm.
Could you stand up, please? Stand up? Could you just stand up? Yeah. You look so pretty today. So.
So I'm Sarah, and I work here as a research assistant in Priori here. And basically, my question is meant to you. So, as someone that used to work as UN ambassador, what do you think international organizations such as UN, what role do they play in creating peace in countries such as Somalia? And another question which is related to that is that in order to create sustainable peace and reconciliation in Somalia, do you think more support or emphasis or investment should be given to art, or do you think it should be given to international organizations such as the UN and etc.? Thank you.
Okay, and then you gotta remember these because I've forgotten them already.
You know what would be better? Maybe if we address these two?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say I don't represent Somalia. I'm just a citizen. I'm a Somali citizen. You know? But I'm going to give my honest opinion, and I'm going to be as honest and as frank as possible. It's a myth to say Somalis are homogenic or they speak all one language. It's a myth. Okay. The conflict in Somalia has affected almost every Somali person. It affected me personally as well. My family are from the Somali region, which is under the administration of Ethiopia. Okay? If my people were given the right today, this is just a fact. I'm talking from experience of generations, like I've talked to my family members. I'm just talking from 10 members of my family. If they were given the option to be part of Ethiopia or to be part of Somalia, however destroyed Somalia is, they would go with Somalia. The source of the Somali conflict came from the borders that you mentioned. Somalia was not just two sides, Somali region. There were three missing pieces, which were vital and important. One is northeast Kenya. The British actually did a referendum. They chose to be part of Somalia, but they were refused. Exactly.
Congratulations, here you have your independence.
Exactly. So this story of how Somalis were homogeneous and they all have the same faith and they couldn't get along is really what the mainstream media they like to portray. The conflict, the source of conflict of the Somali conflict is because of those borders that you mentioned, the European borders you mentioned. My brothers and sisters, these are, say we share the same mother, are from Hargeisa. My father originally his father was from also what was considered a British Somaliland. Right? So I'm talking generations. Now, if the British and these Europeans come and they put these borders and say, oh, your camels can't go over there now and they can't graze in that land, then obviously the conflict is going to come back. So I hope that answers that particular question. Now, the other question was, from what I can remember, the UN. Okay. And actually, it's an important question because it was what role did the UN play in terms of peace building? Obviously, they haven't done anything. They haven't done much. You know why I say that? Because if you look at the regions, the Somali regions, where there was no international involvement, they are stable and they are peaceful. A case in example, Somaliland, Puntland, those regions solved their own problems because there was no international community. There are too many hands in Mogadishu, international hands. So, in my opinion, if Somalis, we Africans had ways of reconciliation. We have traditional ways of dealing with conflict. Now, these are the regions that I mentioned. They managed that. They did their own elderly ways of clan reconciliation because that was sometimes some of the problems, after the wars of the border wars, then it became clans and so on. So if they were given the opportunity, I think they will solve those problems. Now, in terms of the art, I don't think Somali artists need outside money or government money. Somalis love art. We traditionally were oral society. Poetry was like the root of our culture, So when I go to my hometown in Jijiga, when people find out that I'm staying in a house, people come to that house. They expect me to sing for them. Really, people do that. Like elderly mothers, they would come with their daughters. The sons would come there. That's still part of that culture, So art is loved in our culture, and I think, especially nowadays, people can have with all these social media platforms and so on, they can, but if they can get some funding, why not? If they can get some encouragements, I think it will only help.
Okay, there's questions on this section here.
Was there
Just stand up, please.
Hi, my name is Mahmoud and studied psychology, become a clinical psychologist and working in mental health therapy. So my main question will be to you, which is especially in the Somali community, and the media and the music artist wise, how, and I know as you mentioned now you're an alone person and obviously you cannot represent the entire Somalia, but how would you, from your personal perspective and from the artist perspective, contribute to less discrimination in the Somali community when it comes especially into the minority who maybe suffer from the mental illness, or people who choose to live their life differently? Because to be honest, I experienced that in the Somali community there's a lot of, unless you live in the same way we live, then we discriminate. And that is clear thing. You don't even have to be different, you just need to be different clan. And then we discriminate the others. Nevertheless, if they want to live their life different, like women's right, like for example, if they suddenly don't want to wear a hijab or anything, sexuality is very important topic that we don't talk about. If the LGBT community in the Somali community, how would you think that as a Somalian we can create less discriminative, but also more acceptance, more respect for people who live their life different than how the box live in the general? Thank you.
There was a couple of questions here.
Can I also just say that it's 4 o'clock. Some people want to go. We actually have a song at the end. So for those of you who are willing to withdraw, because then we have time for songs, I would strongly recommend.
So just take like 4 more questions and that's it. Okay. So we have
Yeah, but there isn't loud enough. So.
Could you stand up?
Hello everyone. I am a second-year master's student, majoring in international relations.
Can you use your microphone?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And I was so excited with the title of this talk, because I am trying to write my thesis on something like a little bit relevant. How can I use literature, poetry, drama, and stuff like this in international relations in order to make nations to be able to communicate better and understand better? So this is the purpose of my thesis. So the thing is that what you mentioned, there are very interesting things that you mentioned, so all of you 3 can answer this, but the things that you mentioned, that like alliteration, allegory, pun, and stuff like this, I'm from Iran, and my country is one of those countries in the list, and you know that whenever everybody hears Iran, so that, oh, Iran, so we have, I totally understand this, that like maybe the same experience that like you as a Somali person. So the thing is that, and also we have something that it is called popular culture in international relations, but the way that the Western world is using this popular culture is to impose their ideology and the way of thinking, for example, Hollywood, into the brains of other nations around. So the question is, how can we reverse this trend? How can we use art or literature in general in order to show the similarities and say that instead of focusing on differences that makes conflicts, why don't we use these similarities in order to communicate better? And how can researchers and how can artists can impose this idea to the elites and to the system?
Thank you. That was, and there's the gentleman behind you.
Hi. Hello, my name is Mahad Abdullahi. I'm a journalist from Somali-speaking language here in Norway called InterFM, or you can just visit interfm.no, Maqal Radio Somalis. And I'm very, very happy to meet my Maanta or Hassanur. I remember I interviewed him 2010, 2011. I just want to add what Maanta said earlier. I'm a member of the 1974-75 who went to village and educate our people. I'm very proud. And little bit, it's not about punishment if you will not go, but we're not getting for privilege. We used to have free education, free books, at the same time $15 a month. And if I tell you a little bit, 4 shilling was $1, so you can see how strong our shilling that time. At the same time, and come every weekend, we get from the Wapari to sing for us, to entertaining us, our village, every street, like Hassan Adan Samater, God bless him, Mr. Omar Dule, Muhammad Moge, Halima Khalif Magol, all of them we have met and they push them entertaining us. Anyway, how can we can get at the same time today? Nothing is free. Everything is you have to pay from the primary to high education in Somalia. Very sorry, it's costing a lot of money. That's why we used to. I've been in Hargeisa, I've been in Mogadishu, and almost 20%, 40% children not going to school because of it costs a lot of money. And how can we, like Mr. Maanta, to come back like we used to in free education, free.
Oh wow!
through to the fun, like you were very. How can we get like we used to earlier? Sorry, I know it's very difficult. I just want to push a little bit.
Yeah. You know, I'm so glad I'm not in your shoes. Okay, so we have, was there any more questions on this side? There's just one more.
The last question.
So just
maybe ask the question.
Just ask the question, we'll try and remember, yeah?
This one.
But make it very brief, please. Could you
it's very, very brief.
Yeah.
Hello, Maanta.
Hello.
My name is Sarah Paece, and I'm born and raised in this country. I study English in Oslo University, my last year. My question is really complex, but I'm going to keep it really summarized. As a Somali-raised diaspora girl in Norway and in the UK, I was wondering, how can you reach out to the diaspora children and teach us about the Somali literature? Because that is very poor in our society. So can you just give us a little bit of advice on that?
I'm going to plug in some promotion here.
Right.
Okay. In March, one of the first Somali children albums is coming out. I'm doing it with Professor
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Right.
I'm going to talk to you about it afterwards, actually.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so one of the questions here was about combating internal discrimination. Would you like to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I actually want to finish Sarah's question as well.
Right. Okay.
Because I feel like we rushed that one. But more needs to be done because, like Sarah's generation, people who were born in European countries and outside of Somalia, they never had that connection, even though there seems to be a lot of like activities from them that want to give back. So I think literature, and nowadays even there's a lot of young people who write blogs. That's another way of like even fighting discrimination, I would say. So that particular album that I'm doing, I was lucky enough to work with Professor Saeed, who was the lead member of that particular band, the Iffit band, and he was knowledgeable. And so, you know, for him he's having his input. And we had even the children write their own experiences. They were all born there in Minnesota, so they were writing songs about, you know, like issues that they face. Yeah, I mean, it only happened, the opportunity was only in Minnesota, so they invited me, and Minnesota asked me to do that, you know. And it's something that I've always wanted to do. So it's bilingual, so then they can understand. We did Somali. There'll be some translations also on the websites, and it's only going to be, like, I think on the 17th or 18th of March, that's going to come out. And it's quite historic because it'll be, since the war, one of the first. So I think artistically, that's what artists can do. not just about love songs or series. I think even the children need to learn some like historical things. They need to also because there's none that exist at the moment.
So the thing is that when I was growing up, my parents, they had organised together with other Pakistani parents as well in Scotland, something called Urdu school. So there we learn Urdu. And where parents organise their own classes on Saturdays and Sundays, for example, for an hour or 2 hours. I know it can be quite boring, but at the same time, you're passing on this knowledge to the younger generation. But let's go back to the question, and if try and keep it very brief.
Sure, sure.
Combating internal discrimination within Somalian communities.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, every community have their own issues. I'm not going to deny the fact that we Somalis have a lot of discrimination within our own communities. One thing also we need to realize is, I think we need to be patient with our parents because they've suffered a lot. They were victims of discrimination in most cases because of these wars that happen and so on, So in one, generation, they're not going to just adapt to these countries or new lifestyles or like the Hollywood that, you were talking about, these ideologies and so on. I'm not specifically saying they should switch to that. It exists, but as an artist, I think we shouldn't be afraid to talk about and to sing about these issues and to address them is the one way of doing it, That's what
yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I was also going to say, in relationship to your question, is that I very much agree with you that we do have to be forgiving with the older generation, and especially the Somalian generation. They didn't have the experience, for example, Pakistani first generation going to Scotland or coming to Norway, for example. The Somalian first generation, they have experienced enormous trauma. And I mean, displacement, how do you deal with all of that and have to deal with trying to integrate when you move to a new country, So I think that in many ways, I'm hopeful because we have your generation, you have my generation, you have the generation, for example, my son today is 23 years old. What hope he can give, I'm very doubtful. But anyway, that's a totally different story. But definitely there is hope. I always believe that we cannot force the older generation, but we can do is have those discussions within our own, generation.
Oslo? Oh, actually in Norway. My band and I were performed in Larvik, So, but today I found out recently that there's Ali who lives in this beautiful city, and he happens to play the oud. And the oud is the stable or the original, the founding instrument of Somali music. It's also like Arabic, it's an Arabic instrument really. I think maybe Iraqi or Syrian. And it's like when Somalis were writing songs, this is the instrument they've used. So I thought, since I don't have my band, we invite Ali, and maybe we do one of the original classic songs, one of the first Somali classic songs. So forgive me, we haven't had any rehearsals, but we're just going to do our best for you, okay? And we hope you enjoy. Don't be shy, put your hands together.
Karayo
Thank you all so much, and particular welcome to Ali on Oud and I'm Maanta.